Hi everybody and welcome back to another video. So as you're probably aware, the Oscars are coming up soon, and in this video I thought I'd do a little reflection video on the Best Picture winners of the past 10 years. So in yearly order then, those films are The King's Speech, The Artist, Argo, 12 Years a Slave, Birdman or the Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance, Spotlight, Moonlight, The Shape of Water, Green Book and Parasite. And in this video I'm going to be ranking them in order from worst to best, and at the end of each time I've talked about a film I'm going to ask, should they have won Best Picture that year? And if not, what should have won instead? So let's get started with number 10. Right, Spotlight is one of those films that I normally wouldn't go to the film and watch anyway, because I just find things like that boring. They just bore me to death. And I just don't really like the politics and something that's not really engaging. And I feel like a story like Spotlight wouldn't really engage me enough, but after watching it I really thought it was very good. So Spotlight tells the true story of how the Boston Globe uncovered the massive scandal of child molestation and cover-up within the local Catholic archdiocese, shaking the entire Catholic Church to its core. But what I enjoyed about Spotlight was that it was a mystery story that was quite different to the traditional mystery stories that we normally see anyway. You know, when you think about mystery films and TV shows, that they are based on a murder, but this time it's about something different, about a particular community. And to kind of reveal something in relation to that group was quite groundbreaking at the time. And to reveal something like that can be seen as quite shocking, but from a storytelling perspective in the world of cinema, that it's a very different form of mystery story. So it's one of those films that I wouldn't necessarily immediately go and rush to the box office at the cinema to go and get a ticket for, but I only really watched it at the time for the Oscar hype. But should it have won Best Picture that year? I'm not really sure. It only won, I think, 3 Oscars, but I think I would have probably given it to either Room, which was my favourite film of 2015, or even Mad Max Fury Road. Now, when I first heard about Argo in 2012, I thought it sounded a really interesting idea. I was really intrigued to see what kind of film it was going to be, because it was based on a true story, but it had certain elements that made me think, how can that possibly be a true story? You know, it just sounded very fictionalised. And that is the adaptation of turning an actual real-life situation and a scenario that kind of turned that on its head. So occurring during the hostage crisis in Iran in the late 1970s, American refugees escaped the chaos, and in response the government recruit extractor Tony Mendez to recruit them with a plan that involves posing as a Hollywood film producer and refugees as his film crew members. I think how Argo represents the film industry in this respect is that obviously when you think about films and television in general, it's an escapist form and a form of, you know, distraction, whereas in the film you know that these people are wooing the people in Iran to try and escape. But I do question the authenticity of how it was represented, because, you know, how much of it was really pulled off, how much of it was really needed, and how much needed to be represented in a kind of thrilling and somewhat fantastical way. It was just entertaining to watch. Should it have won Best Picture that year? I don't think so. I think I would have probably given it to Zero Dark 30. Now, Green Book is a film that I didn't really see until recently. I don't really know why. It wasn't necessarily because I wasn't looking forward to seeing it or I wasn't interested. I just never got round to watching it, but I did only recently catch it, and I really enjoyed it. It was actually very, very good. I knew obviously about it that it had surprised a lot of people when it did win Best Picture back in 2018 in film and 2019 at the ceremony. I just knew that there was a bit of controversy surrounding the film, and that was more so about the themes and how people responded to the message of the story. So it's loosely based on a true story, and it follows Tony Litt, played by Viggo Mortensen, who's a bouncer turned chauffeur for a black pianist, Dr. Don Shirley, who was scheduled to tour down the southern states of America during the early 1960s. So as I mentioned, the film does go into certain moments and certain themes of racism and of sexual orientation as well, of a black man going down to southern states in America and getting mistreated horribly by the people there. But I did read when the film came out that the real life Don Shirley's family absolutely hated the film, and that includes Don Shirley's relationship with Tony. They even said that Don and Tony weren't even friends, they never really had any connection together as the film depicts. But apparently I even read that actor Mahershala Ali had to even apologise on behalf of the film crew about the representation of Don Shirley in the film. And it's weird actually, because Ali actually went on to win the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for the film. So whether he did true justice to the character based on that, I don't know. But besides the controversy regarding the authenticity of their relationship, as a film I thought it was very good. I really enjoyed it, and the performances from both Mortensen and Ali were fantastic. But should it have won Best Picture that year? I would probably say at the time I was very surprised, given that Roma was probably the front runner to win it. And I still haven't seen that film yet. But some other films that year that were nominated for Best Picture alongside Green Book probably deserved it more, maybe. Maybe Star is Born, but I thought as a film it was a very good film, very entertaining, but a Best Picture winner, I'm not entirely sure. When Moonlight came out, I didn't really know much about it or what to even expect, because it was just something that just seemed like another bog standard story about a young man and his life and his surroundings in his neighbourhood. And I thought to myself, what else could Moonlight bring to the table that isn't something that we've already seen before? And to an extent it did, because it was all about perspective, and that's what I enjoyed the most about it, because it was from the point of view of a young man from his childhood to his adult life, and how he dealt with certain issues that were going on in his family and his relationships. So Moonlight is split into 3 chapters, and it follows the story of Chiron, a young black man that explores his childhood growing up in Miami and his adolescent and adult phases as he seeks to find his own path in life, while also struggling to come to terms with his own identity and sexual orientation. So the film definitely does acknowledge the importance of addressing themes of identity and sexual orientation within the black community, but I just don't think it kind of did it in enough detail as it probably could have been. Yes, it was about perspective and it was about Chiron's life, but I don't think it explored it in greater detail, so I don't think it fulfilled its maximum potential. But that being said, I did really enjoy the visual style, the unique cinematography, and the performances as well. It's no coincidence that Mahershala Ali won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for this and for Green Book, as I mentioned previously. So that's 2 Best Picture winners in the space of 2-3 years that he's won an Oscar. So it goes to show that for me, he's a brilliant actor. But anyway, Moonlight I did enjoy, but I don't think it kind of capitalised on the themes and all the issues that it could have explored in more detail. But should it have won Best Picture? I'll never forget my reaction when it did win Best Picture, because of course, as most people know, La La Land was named as the winner of Best Picture that year, but of course there was a bit of a mix-up, probably the biggest howler in Oscar history, that it was of course given to Moonlight in the end. If I had to compare those 2 films as to which one I would have picked to win Best Picture out of Moonlight or La La Land, I probably would have picked La La Land, and that's not necessarily because of the production values or anything, but I think it just focused a bit more on character and a bit more on, you know, narrative depth than Moonlight probably did. Right, so Birdman or the Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance, or simply known as Birdman as I'm going to be calling it in this section of the video, is a film that I was really excited for, because I felt like it was going to depict a sense of truth on one side about the arts and theatre industry, while also exaggerating some elements of it as well in a kind of fantastical way. And I did feel like Birdman did kind of strike a nice fine balance between them. Michael Keaton plays Regan Thompson, a washed-up movie star who previously played a superhero, hence the title Birdman, who has a new ambition to star in a Broadway production in the hope that it would become a revival in his performing career. Birdman is a film that kind of shows the realities sometimes of what actors in Hollywood and on Broadway in the West End go through in their careers. They have highs and then they have lows. It's about how they kind of deal with that and how that affects them behind the scenes. And that's why I really enjoyed Michael Keaton's performance, because he definitely brought a seriousness to the character, but he also kind of gave us a very theatrical one as well, and that was the whole point of the film. But should Birdman have won Best Picture when it did? I'm quite conflicted, to be honest. Probably more so than any other that I'm going to mention in this video, because it was definitely a worthy Best Picture winner, and I'm glad it did win, and it probably did deserve it in the end because of how good it was. But I just feel there was another film that really competed with it so strongly that could have won instead, and that was Boyhood. And out of the 2 of those films, because they were both groundbreaking in 2 totally different ways, personally, because it was groundbreaking, I would have probably given it to Boyhood, but I'm still glad that Birdman won. So it was a win-win, basically. Now, when a fantasy film gets the attention of the Academy, it immediately catches my attention, because I love fantasy cinema anyway, but I love dark fantasy cinema. Fantasy films are getting more acknowledged by the Oscars, by the Golden Globes, by the BAFTAs, by the Critics' Choice Awards, etc. And usually it involves a pioneering director of that genre. And this time, of course, it's Guillermo del Toro, who is particularly well known for his dark fantasy films. I mean, Pan's Labyrinth earned a lot of recognition when it came out. It had Oscar nominations and it was up for Best Picture contention, but sadly it wasn't nominated. But I think Guillermo del Toro definitely brings out something in the Academy that is revolutionary for fantasy filmmaking, to basically allow stretch for imagination. So from the extraordinary mind of Guillermo del Toro, The Shape of Water is a unique fantasy romance of Eliza, a mute janitor working in a government laboratory, who discovers their latest experiment, a bizarre creature, one that I feel is basically a combination of a fish and a human. But when you read that story aloud, it makes me think, really? Is that really worthy of a Best Picture winner? And you know what? I think it probably is, because I'll probably just answer the question, not what I was going to say at the end, but I just think how it's done and how it's executed and just kind of celebrates, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the use of imagination and getting your own creativity out, and Del Toro really did that in his auteurist style. Now, for those who don't know what auteur means, it's basically like a French word for author, where a director puts their personality or interests forward in a film. So I think The Shape of Water is absolutely extraordinary in terms of the visuals, in terms of the themes, and I think what's really unique about it is that the title itself is obviously The Shape of Water, and the theme of it is water, so it kind of unites two separate worlds where there's human and there's this creature that's like a fish but also has like human physicalities as well. It was entertaining, it was fantastic, the performances were great, especially the performance from Sally Hawkins, who proves to me that you don't necessarily have to speak to give a fantastic performance, but just the beautiful visuals and just the themes that the story addresses, and not necessarily the message, but just the idea of how things come together. Now, should it have won Best Picture that year? I've already answered the question, as I've mentioned. Overall, I probably would have said yes, it did deserve to win. Although Get Out, that was also nominated that year, was probably my favourite film of 2017, but as a worthy Best Picture winner, Shape of Water, yes, 100%. I would have wanted it to win anyway, because it would have only been the second fantasy film to have won Best Picture after Lord of the Rings: Return of the King, so that's another huge leap for fantasy cinema and the Academy's acknowledgement in celebrating films like it. The Artist was one I had kind of mixed feelings about, because it's a traditional silent film set in the 1920s, but it's made in 21st century. So it kind of rang a few alarm bells in my mind as to how traditional it's going to be, but how relevant is it? Why are they doing it in that way? Why now for a 21st century audience who may or may not be interested? I thought it did a really, really good job, and to just capture that feeling, because of course the silent era was nearly 100 years ago. So how well could the artist actually capture that truthful depiction of how silent films were made back then? So as I mentioned, it's set in the 1920s during silent era Hollywood, and it tells the story of George Valentine, who is a famed silent movie star, and his career becomes challenged when the film industry starts introducing talkies, a simple phrase for sound cinema, while building a close bond with a rising young actress, Peppy Miller. So I think it's something that kind of plays along with a fictionalized and exaggerated story that distinguishes between the silent era of Hollywood and the sound era of Hollywood. It definitely paid tribute and homage to the traditional silent era of cinema and its change and transition into sound cinema, and I think it would definitely encourage people to watch silent films a bit more, especially as it of course won Best Picture. But should it have really won it? It's interesting because the film was made in 2011 and it's a silent film. It's immediate Oscar bait, but its biggest competitor at the time was another film that celebrated another phase of cinema, which was Hugo. So it's kind of a bit of a self-indulgent year that year. But overall, out of the two films, I probably enjoyed Hugo more. But in terms of getting the message across and getting people to watch more silent films and appreciate the classic era of film, I probably would say that yes, The Artist probably deserved it more. I remember when The King's Speech won Best Picture, because 2010 was probably the best year in film for a very long time, and the fact that The King's Speech won over other films like Toy Story 3, Inception, The Social Network, Black Swan, 127 Hours, it competed against so many fantastic films that year, and there was a lot of controversy surrounding why it won and the fact that it's based on a true story and the performances and all of those things. So The King's Speech follows the story of Bertie, who is a member of the British royal family who has suffered a severe stammerer for all of his life. And upon the death of his father, King George V, and abdication of his brother Edward VIII, Bertie is suddenly crowned King George VI. With war looming, Bertie seeks the support of speech therapist Lionel Logue to overcome his impediment and unite the country with words of both solemnity and reassurance. It was just the feeling and the tone that made it really feel like it was in the 1930s. And a lot of that was down to the camera work from Tom Hooper. I think he's a great director, by the way, besides some of the flops that he's done in recent years. But also the performances as well, like Colin Firth, who I thought was fantastic. They could not have picked a better person. In fact, I've actually watched the real-life King's Speech that you see at the end of the film. He captured the voice, he captured the pauses in the stammering, and all of those things absolutely perfectly. And that's why he went on to win the Oscar. The chemistry that Colin Firth had with actor Geoffrey Rush, who played Lionel Logue, I would probably go as far as say that the chemistry between them was probably the best by two actors that I've probably seen in a long time. I felt like I was really watching the real-life Lionel Logue and the real-life George VI / Bertie. And if the real-life King George VI and Lionel Logue saw the film, I'm sure they would be proud of both Colin Firth and Geoffrey Rush's performances. And Helena Bonham Carter was brilliant, as well as Elizabeth, who went on to become the Queen Mother. I thought she really kind of captured that sense of support and emotion towards her husband, while also kind of showing her own strength too. And of course, Bonham Carter has already played a character within that family, Princess Margaret in The Crown. So I think she really knows how to kind of glorify the royal family, while also giving us something in her performance that really conveys that message among the rest of the characters. But should it have won Best Picture in 2010? While it had a lot of competitors that year that were just absolutely huge for film back then, like I mentioned at the very beginning of this section, I just felt like The King's Speech had the slight edge in the sense of not just production values, but in terms of characters and relationships. And that's why I felt like it deserved it more than the other ones did. Now, I will admit that 12 Years a Slave was a film that I was actually really nervous about seeing, and it wasn't necessarily because of just the subject of it, but how serious it was going to be, how authentic it was going to be. Racist remarks and the abuse and the mistreatment of all the slaves during that time period seemed to me to create a sense of truth and authenticity of how people were treated at the time, and I think that's a testament to the film itself in creating that truth. So once again, it's another true story, and it's set a few decades before the American Civil War, and it follows the story of Solomon Northup, a free black man working as a musician who lives with his wife and 2 children. That all changes though as 2 white men promising him employment drug and sell him to a slave pen, thus resulting in years of slavery. Hence the title 12 Years a Slave, because, well, he was a slave for 12 years. I mean, making any film about slavery is difficult enough and sensitive as it is. A lot of that was down to the performances, starting with Chiwetel Ejiofor, who was absolutely fantastic as Solomon Northup, aka Platt, according to the slave owners. What Ejiofor did for me was that he really kind of captured that intellectual feeling of humanity. Michael Fassbender was absolutely despicable as Edwin Epps, who was probably the most despisable character I've probably watched in a long time. I absolutely hated him. And despite hating the character, it was a credit to Michael Fassbender's performance, because I'm sure there were plantation owners at that time who behaved exactly like how he did, where he would, happily just kill slaves without batting an eyelid, and he would abuse them, and he would do all sorts of things. That's why, as I mentioned, Michael Fassbender's performance was very true to the kind of person that he was portraying at the time. And Lupita Nyong'o, for me, gives probably the best on-screen debut I've probably ever seen. At the moment, she's starting to become one of my favourite actresses, because I just feel that she's just getting better and better and better in the films that she's being in. Her performance in this was just superb as Patsy, and Patsy was apparently a real-life person like Solomon was. Like I say, she did an absolutely fantastic job, and she definitely deserved the Oscar. But should it have won Best Picture that year? Yeah, I think so. So in this video, I've already talked about 9 of the 10 Best Picture winners of the past 10 years, and there's only one more left. You probably know what it is, but what is the best Picture winner of the past 10 years? Let's find out. It just had to be Parasite as number 1. It was an easy choice. If anything, I found it harder to choose the order in the middle, like, from 2nd up to 9th and 10th. Everything about it was absolutely spot on. I'm not going to be talking too much about Parasite, but I'm going to be expecting you to be watching my video review of it. What I will say is that it really surprised me of how good it was, and I really love when a film surprises me. That's why I would still say that it's probably the best Picture winner in a very long time. In fact, it's probably the most deserving Best Picture winner probably since Lord of the Rings Return of the King, and I'm so glad that it did. And again, it was thoroughly deserved. I would highly recommend that people see it. It's absolutely fantastic. So there you have it. I've ranked the Best Picture winners from the past 10 years, from 2010 in film to 2019 in film. The films of 2020 will be celebrated in the upcoming Oscars in a few weeks. How would you rank those films from worst to best? Let me know in the comments below what you think. And as always, if you did go on to enjoy this video, please hit that like button and subscribe for more, and have a notification bell tick for every single time I upload a video. And I'll catch you in the next one. Take care, everybody.